Plant City Police Chief Richard Mills had spent 34 years in law enforcement, but the scene he walked into during the early hours of May 3, 2026, would become the absolute worst of his entire career. Across 2 separate locations, 4 people were dead: a 27-year-old mother, a 55-year-old grandmother, and 2 infant girls. A 2-year-old child was the lone survivor. This mass casualty event unfolded in the quiet, historic Plant City district, tucked right into the Tampa Bay area. In cases like this, investigators often find a long, documented paper trail of physical domestic violence leading up to a violent climax. That wasn't the case here. Instead, the conflict that set this tragedy in motion started with a marital argument over adult content discovered on a cell phone. We need to look at how a mundane domestic disagreement between 2 spouses escalated into a quadruple murder-suicide in a span of exactly 48 hours. The clock starts Friday, May 1st, when officers received their first call to the Dempsey household. Haley and her husband, Jay, were having a heated dispute over pornography she discovered on his phone. Responding officers interviewed them and noted no indications of physical violence. Seeing a verbal argument but no immediate threat, police closed the call and left the residence. Yet later that same day, Haley's behavior took a sharp, suspicious turn. She called police back, demanding they check her vehicle. She was convinced her husband had hidden tracking devices on the car to monitor her movements. Law enforcement documented this transition from marital friction to unfounded suspicion. But because no physical trackers were found, the underlying shift in Haley's behavior was ultimately dismissed. Following that second police visit, Haley decided to leave the house. She packed up her 3 young daughters and her mother and checked into a local hotel for the night. Her mother, 55-year-old Valerie DeBow, was visiting the family from the nearby coastal city of Clearwater, suddenly finding herself in the middle of the crisis. The very next day, Saturday, May 2nd, the police were called to the Dempsey home for a 3rd time. Haley placed a rational-sounding request. She wanted a police escort to safely retrieve her clothing from the home while her husband was away. Later that afternoon, records show Haley and Jay actually met at a local public library to have a calm, one-on-one conversation. A hotel stay, an escorted retrieval of clothes, and a meeting on neutral ground are standard markers of a safe domestic separation. Because these actions mirrored a rational exit strategy, they created an illusion of stability that hid the situation's volatility from authorities. The 48-hour window closed in the early morning hours of Sunday, May 3rd. Inside the family home, Haley took a firearm and fatally shot her mother, Valerie. Immediately after that first shooting, Haley fled the residence on foot, taking her 3 young daughters with her into the night. She moved a short distance away to West Hever Street, concealing herself and the children behind a thick patch of bushes and trees in a front yard. There, she turned the weapon on her own children. She killed her 4-year-old and 4-month-old daughters, fired a shot at her 2-year-old, which narrowly missed, and then took her own life. Responding officers found the bodies across the 2 separate locations. Haley's husband, Jay, was immediately detained for questioning. However, a thorough investigation into his potential involvement completely ruled him out as a suspect. The case was formally closed as a murder-suicide. Looking back at the evidence, Chief Mills noted that while there were no obvious warning signs of physical violence, there were ultimately indications of mental illness at play. Catastrophic psychological breaks can happen too fast for standard law enforcement protocols to intercept. They often disguise themselves as routine domestic friction until the timeline finally runs out.